This is the 007 Debriefings. I'm Intelligence Officer Wiz.
And I'm Weapons Specialist Zero.
Yeah, there we go. See? I got it the second time. Zero, we're here to talk about the Russian exploits of James Bond from his mission From Russia with Love. I guess the thing to talk about first before we get into the specific parameters of this mission is this is a marked improvement visually from Dr. No. Dr. No wasn't a bad-looking movie. It was still a very good-looking movie back then. But you can tell they had more money to work with in this movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the only issue that I saw come up again was for some of the vehicle sequences, the most apparent being the train. It's like a green screen background for like the scenes outside of the train and stuff like that. It's just like, all right, we got more green screen action.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, though, they're a lot better than they were in Dr. No. Like, I think...
Oh, yeah.
I didn't really catch that right away. It was... I think where I noticed it once was one of the boat sequences. That's when I was like, there it is. And then that was it. The rest of them, I think, were done a lot better at this point. But the visuals are a lot better. They use locations a lot better in this movie. Visually, it is just a huge step up from Dr. No. Why don't we get into our specific parameters? As we did last time, we divide everything into certain sections to figure out where the strengths and weaknesses are from the movie. So let's start with 007, and that is James Bond, played by Sean Connery. I don't know about you, but I think he just took what worked the last time and upped it up a bit, but also worked on the hand-to-hand combat. The rest of it, for the most part, I think is about the same, but better than Dr. No.
It's definitely markedly better than Dr. No. It definitely seems like after Dr. No was a hit, that it was kind of like a, hey, you could probably use a bigger budget. Here you go.
Right. No, absolutely. But with Connery specifically, and Connery as Bond, what they did in this movie is they made him not just charming with women. I mean, that's a given in this movie already. But also kind of a charmer with the guys, like a man's man kind of thing where he can get along with different types of guys. Specifically, I'm talking about Kareem Bey, who's played by Pedro Almendarez. In Dr. No, he's kind of like a man on his own island. He's the leader. He's just not somebody that deals with the guys all that much unless he's beating them up or ordering them to do something. In this movie, he kind of strikes a friendship, and he works his charms that way, and it shows very well in this movie.
They definitely nailed the man's man sort of vibe, and he just seems overall just a lot more personable.
The other thing that I will also want to point out is that in this movie, he seems a lot more serious about the mission and a lot deadlier than he would usually be. There are certain things in Dr. No where he's still very nonchalant about things, but in this movie, he seems to be much more focused to where in certain aspects of the film, he does certain things you might not entirely expect unless you've watched all the Bond films and already know what's going to happen. But for example, how he interrogates Tanya towards the end of the film.
And speaking of women in the film, they definitely really lean into the whole womanizing aspect in this one, especially right at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they lean into it too much. I mean, in Dr. No, they were very much on Front Street about it. He slept with, like, I think, 2 or 3 women in that movie. In this movie, he slept with 2, but one was for the mission, essentially. So
yep.
He basically slept with somebody, and they hint towards, I was supposed to be with you, but I had to go to Jamaica for a month, essentially, which is the Dr. No. And then how the mission is in From Russia with Love, yes, he does sleep with Tanya, who is the Bond girl in this movie, but that's mission critical in this. So you could say that he's being more womanizing, but you could also say, well, technically, it's for the mission in this one. This wasn't a kind of like, I'm just going to do this for fun, which is what he did in Dr. No, essentially.
It's just kind of funny that it's just real up front within the first few minutes of the movie and everything. I was like, oh, well, we're just skipping all the pretext, aren't we?
Sure. I will say with Tanya, he portrays Bond as someone who is very charming but also manipulative, which is what you're supposed to be as I would say, as a a spy. Not that I would really know, but he seems like he's completely in control of every aspect, which is what you want him to be in this role, especially with this woman that he is dealing with. The hand-to-hand combat, the gunplay, the driving, marked improvement from Dr. No. And Dr. No, when he was doing hand-to-hand combat, it was more like left foot to right foot, like obviously choreographed. In this one, it felt a lot natural. It felt like it was at a much better speed. And then with gunplay, he was believable as well in this. Like, I think action is another marked improvement for Connery in this.
The action choreography just improved, and I think one of the more natural fights was towards the end of the movie on the train car.
Mm-hmm.
That one felt much more natural. It did not feel stilted. It did not look like, oh, this is totally freaking scripted or anything like that.
That was a great fight scene too, with Robert Shaw as Red in that. Like they both pulled that off really well. Like it was an exciting scene. It was fun, and it went through specific stages that were very entertaining. I would say much better than Dr. No with the few fight scenes he had. So, yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely, great fight scenes in this. So I really like Connery in this. I think between Dr. No and this one, I think he's better in From Russia with Love.
Totally agreed.
So let's get into the villains. Normally I would just do one villain, but here's the thing. According to Google, when I put in who is the villain of From Russia with Love, Google comes up with Colonel Rosa Klebb, who's played by Lot Lenya. That's technically true, but she's barely in the film.
She's more like a mastermind, in my opinion.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. There is the person who comes up with the plan, but she's executing it, and she's the one that puts the ball in motion. It gets introduced to Tanya, who gives her mission, and then hires Red to do what he has to do. I agree with you. She's much more the mastermind, the background character in this. If she was the main villain, there's not much to her in this. She's basically this snide kind of like background character that is, again, essentially in the background. You barely see her in this movie. And then on top of that, her final scene is kind of goofy.
That one did not feel as fluid and as well designed as some of the other scenes. And like you said, it almost feels kind of comedic in a sense too, because like, I guess we're already neck deep into it, but spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it, which I can't imagine that there are many who haven't seen this already, but Klebb is in the hotel dressed up as like an Italian maid helping Bond with his bags and crap like that. And it's just like, you see the scene and you're like, oh, it's obvious who she is.
Yeah.
Just she's not well disguised at all. All she did was just throw on a wig. Holy crap. This is not as fluid as some of the other scenes. How did all the good design of the movie beforehand just kind of fall apart at the end?
I know, this was incredibly goofy. Not even just with the disguise, but how she attempts to kill Bond, which is with her left foot with a blade full of venom, which I'm like, really? It's like I would understand if she was like a martial arts expert, which would have been even goofier, to be absolutely honest. But like, if she was proficient in fighting, then I would have been like, okay, I guess I kind of get it. Or if she was more covert. But in this, it was kind of like, this is really goofy and weird. It just kind of fell off for the rest of the film, because I think the rest of the film, when it came to action, was really good. But to this be the final action sequence, it's kind of like, okay, she was bested with a chair. Great work. That's really good. Klebb, I guess, is the villain. But honestly, the one I want to highlight is Donald Grant, who is codenamed Red, who is played by Robert Shaw. This guy, Red Grant, is actually really good as the villain. He's got the physical build to be intimidating, but he's also deadly quiet. He plays this overarching character that is nearly every scene, but is basically following Bond and Tanya throughout the entire film. And that makes him menacing, and it makes him very engaging to watch. I really like this villain, and when he finally speaks, it's done really well on top of that. So I think this villain is very good.
Grant as a villain was just, I think, really the big part that I thought was interesting about him as a villain was just the fact that he's just very cunning and clever.
Mm-hmm.
He almost sort of toys with Bond in a way, because like he has several opportunities to just outright kill Bond, take the lectern, but he doesn't, because the shootout at the gypsy camp would have been just an easy moment for them to just kind of write the film off as, boom, Bond murdered at the gypsy camp, bam, objective completed. But no, he ends up actually saving Bond a few times and shooting some of the assailants. And you just kind of see him sort of plan this masterful plan, and then you get to the end, and he pretty much just has like Bond at gunpoint with just a weapon pointed to his head, and it's just like, well, here's my master plan. I was gonna kill you and the girl, make it look like a murder-suicide, and then I'll leave some incriminating documents to, cause a scandal with the intelligence community all over the news. And bam, we'll get away with the objective, and your employer's gonna be fucking humiliated. I was just like, wow, what a fucking cunning little bastard.
Yeah. No, definitely. This villain shows more about how deadly Spectre is than I would say Klebb would or any other villain, even Dr. No. Like, I think he is probably the best villain to show how deadly Spectre is. I will say, now that you mentioned him going over everything he was trying to do and what he was about to do, it kind of is like, why would you do that? I guess it's the typical thing that they do in these Bond films back then, where the villain has Bond almost dead to rights, and then like, by the way, this is what I'm about to do. And I'm like, why? It's like, have him figure it out. That would be much more interesting. But overall, like, great villain in this movie. He is the henchman, unfortunately. But I want to put him under villains because I think he's the most dominant villain in the movie, and I think he's very effective. I think he was really good in this movie.
Definitely one of the better Bond villains so far that we've seen.
Well, we've only seen two, so...
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right, let's get to the next one, which is the Bond girl, which is Tatiana Romanov, played by Daniela Bianchi. Leagues better than Honey Rider, which is not hard. But Tanya is already a better character for one specific reason. She has an actual character development. She has motivation throughout the entire film. She is conscripted on a mission who she believes Klebb is a Russian general to seduce and trick Bond into delivering the Lecter and misinforming British intelligence. She will then be eventually saved by Russian operatives. What's interesting about Tanya in this movie, you don't exactly know where she's going in this movie. Like, you learn from the beginning of the movie, which I would want to say right off the bat, which was brilliant in this movie, is that you do not see actual James Bond until 20 minutes into the film. They give you the whole setup of what the villains are doing, which is what Spectre's up to, how they're training their people to kill Bond, and then what they're doing with Tanya. I think that was a brilliant move. But in this movie, when Tanya is finally introduced to Bond, you don't exactly know where she's going in this movie. Do you really know that she's falling for Bond, or is she manipulating Bond?
In some moments in the beginning of the setup, it seems like she's just like, I'm just doing this for the mission. I'm just doing this for the mission. Mm-hmm. But as the movie progresses on, the lines start to blur, and it just seems like more and more she's just like, I really, really kind of care for him, and I think I'm starting to fall for him. And that was kind of how I felt.
See, there's really two ways to think about this. Either it's a good thing that you can't really figure out whether she loves him or not, because that makes her interesting. You don't know exactly if she's just going into the mission and pretending to fall for Bond to manipulate him, or if she actually is falling in love. You still don't know until the very end, which to some people might be a good thing. To others, it might be a bad thing, because then you're saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, the actress isn't giving any visual clues as to where she feels either way, or the writers didn't provide any context, or didn't even feel that was important. I think it's the former. I think it's actually I think they actually did a pretty good job trying to make you guess whether she is falling for him or not. But to be fair, she was easily more manipulative in the beginning. I mean, for God's sakes, she snuck into his bedroom naked in his bed. It's like, Jesus Christ. I thought about this. Like, if that happened to me, I'd be like, oh, I'm being set up. What's going on? I don't know about you, Zero. Like, Danielle Bianchi is absolutely gorgeous in this movie, so I don't know. If a gorgeous woman was just popped up in my bed naked, I'd be like, what's going on here? Then again, I'm not Bond.
It's definitely feels like such a manipulation in the beginning, and yeah, I think most men nowadays would probably just kind of trip and go, oh, this feels like a setup. Mm-hmm. Just, am I being recorded?
Yeah. Well, if I am, let's go. No kidding. No kidding. Yeah. I don't know about you. I thought this was a really good Bond girl. I really liked Bianchi as Tanya in this, and I really like the character of Tanya in this as well. League's better than Honey Rider. Again, not hard. Because she is a constant in the film, and she honestly is a likable character as well. I kind of buy into her throughout the entire film as well, even when Bond is kind of being a shithead to her at times. I actually really like this Bond girl.
Overall, just like you said, she's a massive improvement over Honey Rider that doesn't have like much intelligence about her. And unfortunately, it's not hard. It's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel.
Yeah. One more thing before we get back to the next one. I like how they made a differentiation in beauty in this. Because Honey Rider was very much the voluptuous young girl with low-cut clothing, showing off her body. Tanya is much more conservative. She's much more of a classic beauty, where she looks good, dresses good, and is just an overall gorgeous woman. Whereas Honey Rider, yes, very attractive woman, but was more about her body, I would say. The movie specifically, because they would purposely have scenes where she was in a two-piece, where you see a lot of her butt. You at least see her breasts a bunch in the movie. She's showing off her body a lot more. Bianchi doesn't in this movie, but I think it's much better for the character, I would say, and much better for the distinct types of differences you would have in Bond girls. So let's get into the action for From Russia with Love. Another huge improvement. Another one. The action in this was very good. Like we mentioned at the beginning, the budget was increased, I think, by another $1 million in this movie. And back when this was made, that's a lot of money. There's a lot of different locations that they go through. It becomes a Bond staple after a certain point. You have the gypsy camp. You have the buildings. You have the train sequence, which was really good. Venice. Like, you have all these different locations that really makes Bond more into a much more glamorous, and I don't know how else to put it, but the globetrottingness of the action makes it much more engaging, unlike Dr. No, where it was really just set in one specific location.
And when you mentioned the budget and everything, for anyone who wants perspective, the extra $1 million in 1963's currency would be the equivalent of getting an extra $9 billion or $9 million in today's money.
Yeah, I was gonna say inflation is not that bad. I was like, $9 billion, what? But yes.
But yeah, so just if you can imagine just a movie going from $9 million to suddenly getting another $9 million, that would be the best equivalent on this. And it really just shows, I think, with the extra budget, they were just able to get some better fight choreographers, and that's why just the action scenes just look so much more convincing. They seem a lot more natural. They don't seem stilted, kind of like how they were in Dr. No, and I think I mentioned it in last week's episode. The fight scenes in Dr. No looked like the corny fight scenes that you would see in the Star Trek TV show, and this one, it just seems like it's a definite improvement, that it just feels like you're seeing just really, really intense hand-to-hand combat, and the exemplar of the entire movie is, in my opinion, the train car fight scene. That one was just really damn good.
Yeah, the fight scene between Shaw and Connery in the train sequence was really good. And the way it was shot was very good, too. It was claustrophobic, and yet they had enough space in there to work and make it seem believable. It was just a really good fight sequence. I agree with you. The hand-to-hand combat is really good. They have more choking, fist fights. There's a lot of multi-actor fight sequences, too. That's the one thing I think that Dr. No really didn't have, is that when Bond was fighting somebody, it was the classic one person stands back while the other fights. Oh, that guy's done. The other guy steps up. In this one, they all seem to like choreograph all together, and it becomes a much more dynamic fight scene. I think the Gypsy Camp is a great example of that, where a lot of things are going on at once, and the choreography in that is just really well done. Another example is like the explosions, the fireworks, the gunplay in this movie. Tons better in this as well. A lot better. There really wasn't much in explosions in Dr. No, but in this movie, they definitely upped the special effects budget in this, and it really showed, and it looked really good.
Overall, just love the action scenes so much more in this movie compared to Dr. No, just from the fact that it just looks better.
Yeah, definitely. The action is a marked improvement. If I were to rate it like Dr. No was like a 5 out of 10. This would be an 8 out of 10. Like, it's just a drastic improvement. Really good. Next one, which I don't think will have the same feelings on, is the Spycraft. I think they kind of took a step back on Spycraft in this one. But I think there's a good reason why. Because this is much more of a cat and mouse movie. In Dr. No, they've highlighted how Bond likes to manipulate scenes and make traps. In this one, Bond is being trapped constantly. He's being tracked. He's being set up a lot of times in the movie. I guess in this case, it makes sense that maybe the spycraft elements aren't as good. But to be fair, if we're going to look at it in that way, I think the spycraft is kind of a miss in this one.
It definitely not too much on kind of like the cleverness of the spycraft. It's just kind of more Bond is constantly being chased after, being tailed, and just constantly having to be on the back step instead of being on the advance and everything. And it isn't until towards the end where he finally gets to advance forward and just take the offensive. Unfortunately, I think that's where this movie falls a little bit short, where Dr. No is fantastic with the spycraft. This one is a bit weaker, unfortunately, for that fact. And the other part of it is this movie also starts to debut the Bond gadgets.
Yes.
Because, like, you've got Q in the beginning going, hey, so here's this little like explosive cartridge that's tied to a briefcase. If you close it with this canister activated, it becomes a gas grenade. So, just be careful when you use it. And I was just like, so this is where all the gadgets start kicking in.
Yeah. You know what? I liked it because not only was it clever, but it was practical too. Like, I can look at this and go, I can see somebody who's really good at engineering stuff can pull this off. I can see that. And that's actually pretty cool. It wasn't until later where they start getting to, there's lasers, my wristwatch that will burrow a hole into somebody's skull. I'm like, okay, that's not realistic at all, but okay. So I kind of like the gadgets in this one, and I do like how they introduce Q, who is played by Desmond Llewellyn. I guess in later Bonds, he becomes much more of a showy role. I do like how they use the gadgets in this movie. I do agree with you there. So,
yeah, I mean, it's not bad. It's just kind of so this is where it all starts. But yeah,
sure.
Just the gadgets in this movie are definitely more on the clever side.
But clever, I think, is better, because when it starts getting to the fantastical is when you're like, okay, so these are just win buttons. These aren't like, this isn't like a clever way for Bond to get out of a jam. This is, okay, I just have to press the button that's on my right sleeve, then they'll blow up, which is what they become later on down the road. Overall, I think the spycraft in this is a little different from Dr. No. It's good, but not as good as Dr. No. But then, again, you mentioned they introduce the gadgets that will become a later staple for Bond. So it's kind of a wash for me. So I think Dr. No is better in this, but the introduction of gadgets is cool.
It's definitely not a bad thing, but yeah, the gadgets, at least in this movie, are on the clever side, which is good, because I just hated like some of the Bond movies where they just go so heavy with the gadgets and everything that they end up, kind of like you said, they kind of end up becoming a literary deus ex machina, where it's just like, Bond is in an unwinnable situation, time to break out that gadget and immediately win.
Yeah. I guess you can say that the way the gadget is used in this movie technically could be that, but I think it's actually much better done in this.
Bond gets clever about it because he kind of lures villain in and says, hey, how much are they paying you? They're probably paying you a pittance, right? I've got some gold in my briefcase, and I could probably pay you more. And of course, just Grant's kind of like scoffing at him, going, you couldn't afford to pay me. It was like, try me. If you want proof, just open that briefcase there. And then, of course, just like Bond's word, there's a whole bunch of gold in there. And of course, just his eyes are just kind of going, oh man, I think I hit the pay dirt. And then Bond gets clever and he's just like, there's more of that in the other briefcase. And the briefcase already has the canister activated. And I was just like, oh, that's a clever play on how to use the briefcase. That is pretty damn good.
What do you think of the spycraft? Better on Dr. No or better with From Russia with Love?
The spycraft is better in Dr. No, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's not to say that it's all bad on From Russia with Love.
Yeah.
I think really the best use of spycraft was the end of the train fight and everything.
Okay, so our next one is sex appeal. Basically, I think the sex appeal really goes into the relationship between Bond and Tanya. And I think it's more about the dynamic that we mentioned on Tanya when it came to the Bond girl section. The whole question is Tanya falling for her or playing Bond in this movie? Is she manipulating Bond or is she in love with Bond? And that question begets another question. Is the movie sexy because it's a power fantasy of a man turning his potential enemy into an ally by the sheer will of his masculine sexual prowess? Or is it sexy because the woman is seducing the man by becoming compliant and submissive while acting and dressing sexy? So is this the woman manipulating Bond, or does Bond have a golden penis?
So the old hunter has become the hunted argument.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. I gotta be honest. When it came to sex appeal, Dr. No was about the multitude of women. I think in this movie, it's the relationship between Bond and Tanya. Clearly, that's what it is, because you have those questions to who's manipulating who has the upper hand, who's really falling for who. I mean, okay, to be fair, I don't think Bond is falling for any woman, to be absolutely honest, when it comes to Sean Connery. In this movie, it's interesting because I understand that this is sexy. I think it is sexy. But why? That's the question I have. Is it the power fantasy or is it the manipulation of Tanya?
I will have to agree with you that it's really going to center all around Tatiana. She seems to be the focal point of the sexiness in the movie.
Definitely. And I think that's why Daniela Bianchi does a great job with this character. This is a type of character that I think needs a good actress to pull this off, and she does it very well in this. The only issue I would have, like I mentioned in there, is I don't think they give enough visual clues as to where she lands either way. You know by the end. But like it's kind of like, of course she fell for Bond. Of course, because he's Bond. Like I would like to have known more of her motivations throughout the entire movie than to just say, well, he's Bond. Of course she loves him. Like, of course. Like that's kind of how it felt. But overall, the sex appeal was very good in there. I think it's the better one in there. I also want to point out, I think the notion of men being aroused by two women fighting each other started with this movie. Because, goddamn that gypsy camp scene. What the hell? Two gorgeous women fighting over a guy, and they're wearing like low-cut crop tops and low-cut shorts and shit. And then after that, they just so happen to both want it with Bond? Okay. I'm like, now I understand it, because I would always see like guys like crowding around when two women like are fighting and being like, oh my god, this is so hot. I'm like, why? They're just kicking the shit out of each other. Now I'm like, oh, I get it now.
Honorable mention definitely goes to the gypsy fight, because I was like, all right, we got this scene where they're hanging out at the gypsy camp, and then suddenly just the fight between the two women. I was like, whoa, that came out of left field. What the?
Yeah, it was just like, oh, by the way, while we're here, there's a fight to the death of who gets the man. I'm like, what? Where did this come from? And then when you see it, like, whoa, okay. Last element, theme song opening credits. The theme song is From Russia With Love, performed by Matt Monroe. The theme song is nowhere near as good as the Dr. No theme song. I mean, that kind of is a given. It's fine. The song is kind of a miss for me, to be absolutely honest. The end of the movie has the crooning part of the song, the actual words, and it's kind of doesn't fit with the rest of the movie. When it comes to the song itself, it's kind of like, I don't really feel it.
This is one of the few times that the Bond song just wasn't great. It wasn't catchy. It didn't really grab my attention at all. And the opening scene where you've got like the credits being projected on belly dancers, I was just like, wow, this is just kind of incredibly just distracting and just kind of all over the place and everything. And,
I want to know who's in this movie, but there's so many breasts and bellies. Come on, man.
And I think that's mostly because just with the more modern Bond films, they do kind of clearly show the credits for the intro credit roll, and I guess that's something that may be kind of a modern Bond invention. But for this one, it was just kind of a, wow, this is kind of flashy and all over the place. Whereas just a lot of the Bond movies that I quite like, the credits are visually interesting, but they don't completely just absolutely destroy the intro credits. At least that's my take on it.
That's the thing with me, though. I thought the opening credit sequence was actually really good. I liked the lighting of it. I liked the way it was shot. I think it's clever how they did that sequence with the belly dancers and how they impose the light onto the flesh of the ladies in that sequence. And it also fits with the movie because it's much more of not just a romance, but a more sexualized story, because it is about Bond or Tanya manipulating them by using their sexual prowess. So I actually thought that was really clever and well done with the sequence of the opening credits, but I just don't like the song. I think the song's bad. I like the opening credits, don't like the song, and I think you just don't like either. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good enough. Okay, Zero, so conclusion time. Go ahead. What is your conclusion from Russia with Love?
Overall, I still think it's a good movie, even if the spycraft is a little weak. But I think mostly it's because of the fact that just story-wise, it's interesting because you've got sort of this like who's manipulating who sort of dynamic between Bond and Tatiana. And then just the significant improvement on the action sequences. It just feels so much better when the action sequences happen and they don't seem stilted, which I've made mention multiple times in this review and everything. But yeah, I would say it's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, this movie is a marked improvement on nearly every aspect of Dr. No. And like you said, the action's great. The way that it's shot is better. The locations that you was a marked improvement. Connery with fist fighting, the action itself is really good. Robert Shaw as the assassin was really good in this movie. Danielle Bianchi as Tanya was another really well done role, despite the fact that I think the character could have been a lot more interesting if they gave her more depth. It is just a stark improvement on Dr. No, which is what you want to see in a sequel. You want the sequel to have elements of the first movie, but drastically improve on them, which is what From Russia with Love did. It has always been one of my favorite Bonds, and I was glad to see it again because it was so entertaining and so fun. It was just a really enjoyable film. All right, Zero, mission accomplished?
Yeah, mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished as well for me for From Russia with Love. Now, if you want my full review on this movie, you can go to my website at iamthewiz.com. You'll have my full written review right on the site, along with a link to the video that has this review that you've just listened to. All right, Zero, next week we're going to go for our next debriefing, and it is the golden rule that is the deadliest. What are we watching next week?
Goldfinger.
Goldfinger. This is one of the more celebrated Bond movies. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think this one just dialed up everything from the previous movies, if I remember reading some of the historical significance of this one. So this one sounds like it should be an interesting watch.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a while since I've seen this, so I'm going to look forward to watching this. I remember liking the villain quite a lot in this. I think the villain was actually really good. That's Ulrich Goldfinger, I think his name was, correct? I think. So tune in next time where we do some more 007 debriefings watching Goldfinger. I am The Wiz.
And I'm Zero.
Talk to you guys next time. Bye.